Offa's Dyke Part 2. When we left our last video on section 15, we had just entered a very large hill and we analysed why there was different sized ditches in Offa's Dyke as we approached the bottom of the valley. We'll continue the flight now and stop off at some more interesting points. In section A20, again we find a connection between Offa's Dyke and water. On the 1800s OS map, we see not just one spring on the alignment of the dike, but two. If the ditch was supposed to be a dry defensive ditch, then the engineering was appalling, as they had several routes to go round these features. But instead, they headed directly towards them for a very good reason. Furthermore, the springs are at 400 and 600 feet above sea level, where you would imagine that active springs would not exist. Even if these springs are not directly underneath the dike, what you should actually understand is that what it's showing us is that the area is of very high water, and therefore if you dug any kind of ditch, and hence sometimes we see wells being dug in the area, it will fill full of water. Therefore a 2 metre ditch, or even a 1 metre ditch, would instantly fill with water because of the high water table. As we enter section A22, we see another very interesting feature. Not only does the dike bend at 90 degrees twice, very similar way as we saw previously with section A15. In fact, it's almost identical, showing that the river was actually in place at one stage and they built subsequent parts of the dike later to meet the lower water levels. This can be shown by the wibbly wobbly path it goes down the slope, and it looks very sporadic as we saw in the previous river valley. After section A29, we find that English Heritage and Ordnance Survey have two different views of Offa's Dyke. On the 1800 map, Offa's Dyke goes west towards the river, then north, and then again east to come back to the realignment, while English Heritage cuts straight across Red Hill Grove. Unfortunately, there is actually no sign of that on the LiDAR map. So who is correct? I would suggest that actually what we're seeing here is as the water levels fell, they tried to maintain the canal by cutting the dike towards the river where they could find more water. But at the same time, they had to try and reconnect to the main part of the dike. So they headed towards some natural springs, which would allow them to keep the dike open, and then they headed back to the original path. As we look at section A33, we can see very clearly why the dikes were created. At the end of this dike, we can see massive quarry pits which have been incorporated into the dike and is part of the dike. This is not a separate entity that's been added later. This is actually on the dike and in the dike and around the dike. The dike and the pits are one, and we can see from this quarrying exactly the reason they built the dikes, and how it's been missed by archaeologists I do not really understand. Towards the end of this series of scheduled earthworks, we see a 60-degree bend towards another spring, as shown on the 1800 OS map for no apparent reason. This turn seems to move the dike into a junction where it meets another dike at 90 degrees going in an opposite direction. This intersection only makes sense if we introduce the prehistoric water levels of the past, where the two dikes become significant intersections across the landscape, showing the perfectly unidentified dike was more extensive than actually Offa's Dyke. that went to a quarry on the hillside. Coxbury Lane is made from a natural prehistoric hollow and is very deep in places, much more profound than Offa's Dyke, which would lead us to believe that this paleo channel would have been flowing with water and effectively meeting the dike, either terminating Offa's Dyke or supplying it with water. This section of Offa's Dyke officially ends in the hills above the River Wye, but the dike at the top of the hill is extremely thin in features. What is of interest on top of this hill is another quarry, and may be the reason for the dike's original construction. We will take this opportunity, as we've come to the end of section A, to look back and see what we have found within our LiDAR survey. Section A is made up of 39 historic England scheduled listings. The average bank width is 9.99 metres. The average bank height is 1.79 metres. The average ditch width is 5.51 metres. The average ditch depth is 1 metre. Features within 200 metres of the dike along this stretch include 25 springs, 73 quarries, 2 ancient sites and 3 Roman sites. The total length of section A is 20,201 metres. The total number of gaps is 14. The total of missing dike is 6,758, or 34% of the total. And the average gap missing is 482.7 metres. Section A is the most southerly 11 miles of Offa's Dyke, and from the new statistics we can now make some assumptions about the dike and its probable function. The traditional view of Offa's Dyke, and hence its name, is a defensive earthwork to keep out the Welsh to the west. The statistics do not support this hypothesis. The most obvious problem is that only 5% of section A of the dike faces only west. In fact, a higher percentage, 15%, faces the wrong way east, and a majority, 38%, has ditches on both sides of the bank. If the earthwork was defensive, you would also expect the counterscarp, which traps people in the ditch in theory, will be seen throughout, yet only 19% of this section has this feature. Moreover, the 14 gaps open up a third, 31% of section A for the enemy to walk around without any difficulty. This is the same as the idea of a political border marker. For this to be acceptable, the only feature you require is a bank, which we do have. But again, there is no reason that 31% of the border marker is missing, especially when the dike follows the contours of the River Wye just some 500 metres to the east. It is also somewhat remarkable that archaeologists could imagine that the medieval cultures would not use the river as a marker and or a defensive barrier, rather than an earthwork which has a third missing. As well as we will see to a greater extent in section B, when another 115 765 metres on top are also missing to disqualify this irrational theory. You are now flying over section B. Offa's Dyke now seems to end for 55 miles, 89,485 metres in fact, and follows the River Wye, which you see below, except for 2 small dykes attributed to Offa of just 2,000 metres. There can be no other reason for this apart from the Dyke being a canal that connects across the land to join rivers such as the River Severn to the River Wye. We're coming to the end of section B now. There's not much to see here, and therefore we're going to move on rapidly to section C, where there's actually some Dyke to examine. But here is a screenshot to see the problems we have with Offa's Dyke. We're travelling along section B, which is the yellow line at the bottom of this screen here, and as you see, there's some miles to go before we could even get any kind of Dyke in the north, which shows the fragmentality of Offa's Dyke and its questionability as being a single entity. Come back, see me for section C, and let's see what more interesting features we can find with Offa's Dyke.